Hello everybody and welcome to the League of Legends, my own game, I can't say it right.
But it was really cool to have a live for League of Legends. It was the first one ever.
And it does not look good as Moma gets himself stuck in a bad pickle. He goes down the pulverizer from Special.
Knight onto Soas, who surely is going to go down in this one. No, not quite. Manages to survive.
You know, in the back of my head, I was like, oh, this is gonna be really big, you know.
Are they actually gonna go for it? Are they gonna go for it? Wow, no way! No way! Oh, wow.
Nexus turrets are almost down. The top is down. TSM going through one turret. AAA going through one turret as well. And we're gonna have to see who pulls this one out. It looks like it's going to be...
When you think about League of Legends and its history, the World Championships will always be brought up. The impact they've left and the stories they're created resonate all the way until today. Faker became the unkillable Demon King during Season 3. The Quadra kill for Hoonimim happened in Season 5. Ignor's level 1 kill bot lane for Misfits was during their miracle run in Season 7. The list goes on and on. Except when it comes to Season 1 Worlds. That is rarely ever brought up in the conversation. Maybe a few diehard fans even remember it because they read an article somewhere or were fortunate enough to watch it back in 2011, but that is a very small fraction of the community. I've been playing since 2010. I didn't even start watching Worlds until Season 2. So this is where I ask you, what do you know about Season 1 Worlds?
What do I know about Season 1 Worlds? Well, let me tell you what I know about Season 1 Worlds.
I think the cash prize was like, what, 100,000?
It was like it had double elimination.
It was America versus EU.
Wasn't it in like some dude's basement?
Freak's basement? Is that anything?
Season 1 Worlds was, without a doubt, hosted in Freak's basement.
It was in Freak's basement.
I know that it was in Freak's basement, and that is pretty much the main thing that I know of.
It didn't happen in Freak's basement like people always meme about.
I know that CLG existed.
TSM, CLG were there. Fnatic, Against All Authority, and I think Epic Gamer.
I also know one.
I think I remember which region won, but I could be wrong.
Past that, it's like, I know the winner, and that's about it.
As you just heard, there really isn't much to go off of with what people know about Season 1 Worlds. Though there are certainly some things that people know, like some of the teams, when it took place, the meme of Freak's basement that is attached to it, and of course, who won it all. However, I won't be spoiling who wins it all in this video. Well, at least not until the end. If you want that information, it's certainly easy enough to come across. All you have to do is look it up. But the point of this video that I want to bring up are the storylines of the players and the teams involved. And believe me, you might think you know some of the histories of these teams, but there is still plenty to learn about where some of the greats began and where some of the stories failed to launch. Here we go. Feels a bit more appropriate to at least pretend to be at the event. But before we truly dive into Worlds for Season 1, we need to discuss what led up to the event. Regional Qualifiers. For Season 1, there were 4 regions, from North America to Europe to Singapore and to the Philippines. Each of them had their own qualifying event, which drastically differed from one another. Even the dates and the length of each qualifier was nearly wholly unique to that region. But sadly, there isn't the most left on the internet of what happened during these sets of regional qualifiers. I spent weeks trying to find even just a crumb. And of course, I acknowledge that by publishing this, someone's gonna come forth with old videos of each game of each qualifier. However, all footage in this video is going to be from a limited collection I was able to get from some official Riot sources, as well as some re-uploads of people who were gracious enough to post them for posterity. Keeping things in chronological order and jumping into our first regional qualifiers, we head over to the Philippines for the Filipino qualifiers, or as it was known at the time, the Clash of Titans. Starting off on April 2nd with final set for, well, April 2nd. 8 teams would participate, with only 2 that are recognizable by even some today, and those being Team Pacific and Miniski. Teams were separated into 2 groups of 4 for a single round robin, with Team Pacific winning all 3 of their games in Group B, and Group A's top dogs being a team called So Effing Cute. Yes, really. Minisky, your story will have to wait for another series of videos. Anyways, on to the finals. The finals were actually only separated by a single game, mostly because it was a best of 1 finals. Maybe. I found some conflicting information on whether it was a best of 1 or a best of 3 through the Wayback Machine. Unfortunately, all I could find out about the series, if it was a best of 3, was that Rammus was played and won in Game 2 of the finals between Team Pacific and So Effing Cute. Regardless, the victors would go undefeated, and that's Team Pacific, marking Team Pacific as the first team to qualify for Worlds ever. The next regional qualifiers would begin on April 8th for the Singapore and Malaysia region, with finals set for June 6th? That's almost 2 months of games and ends just 12 days before Season 1 Worlds begins. I suppose it makes sense when you have a whopping 32 teams participating. Just be grateful this wasn't double elimination. By the way, there are some killer team names in this tournament. Team names such as Killer Penguins, WEED, Anarchy, Hardy Rockers, and my personal favorite, Finding Teemo. I'll give a short synopsis of the round of 32 because the most notable thing in this first round was that every single series was a 2-0. And you heard me right, Singapore and Malaysia used best of 3 throughout their entire qualifiers. Explains why it went on so long. Also, thankfully, the only cool team name that lost was WEED to some team called Zan. We'll let the games play out for now and check back in with them later. Hopping from Singapore and Malaysia to new regional qualifiers, North America and Europe both had theirs on the same days, May 28th and 29th, with Europe's happening before North America's, similar to how we see it later on in League's history with the EULCS and the NALCS. So, let's check out Europe's first. Like in the Philippines, 8 teams took part in this qualifier. However, that is where the similarities end. Europe would be allowed to have 3 teams represent them at Season 1 Worlds, while the Philippines and Singapore and Malaysia only got 1 representative. As well, EU used a double elimination bracket with only best of 3s that allowed for a couple of crazy moments. Looking at the teams, 3 big European brands were emerging at the time. Against All Authorities, Fnatic MSI, and SK Gaming. Each of the big 3 won their best of 3s in convincing 2-0 fashion. Well, if the SK vs Tic Tac series is anything to go off, since Tic Tac surrendered both of the games before they ended. All in all, stock standard for our top teams in the bracket. Outside of our 4th team, that is. A slightly smaller brand than the 3, Gamed DE, or Gamed for short, barely managed to win their series with a 2-1 over Wizards in a close series with a 45-minute Game 3. With only 8 teams involved, Round 2 would play an important role in the tournament, as the 2 teams that won their best of 3 would automatically be guaranteed a spot at Worlds with a minimum of 3rd seed, as the tournament favorites against All Authority took down Fnatic MSI. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything about this matchup, so let's just imagine it was a 2-1 for fun. The other series, SK Gaming faced off against Game. After nearly losing to Wizards, Gamed were not favored, especially due to SK Gaming being the number 1 seed. But we wouldn't be talking about this series in depth if it wasn't exciting, as well if I didn't have footage for it. The series started off with SK in firm control of the game. Constantly, SK were making Gamed play to their tune, but Gamed weren't going to just give up that easily. Fight after fight, rumble after rumble, Gamed pushed SK to their limits. But SK weren't favored in the matchup for no reason. Despite losing their inhibitor, SK knew that to win this game, they would have to play around Baron Nashor objective, which during Season 1 gave a straight up buff to all players on the team that killed it. It is also worth mentioning that getting the Baron buff during Season 1 was normally the nail in the coffin for a game. Once a team got this buff, the game didn't last that much longer after. And Gamed knew this as well. Gamed attempted to stop SK from taking the Baron once, but fuel was burning low after that fight, which granted SK the Baron. Yet, Gamed still weren't done pulling off incredible tricks. They stalled the game successfully against the best efforts of SK, even winning a game-saving fight in their bottom lane around their base. With a second wind in their sails, Gamed knew that SK were simply going to replay the previous play around Baron that had netted them the first one. An all-out brawl commenced as the two met in River. Flashes over the wall by Game's Vayne got the first kill, but SK struck back. Even more flashes were burned by Gamed in order to chase SK, leaving other members of Gamed exposed. And through all the chaos, one fact remained firm. SK's Warwick could not be stopped by any means. SK's experience and patience paid off, winning them the fight. They took down every member of Gamed, all while only losing 2 of their own. After this, SK would only need to bait in game to Baron once more in order to clean up a Game 1 victory. It was a 45-minute bout, but SK showed calm and collectedness despite the scrappiness of Gamed. As long as SK played a bit more patiently, they should take the 2-0 and a spot at Worlds. Now, what to say about Game 2? It seems that SK listened and played more patiently, but perhaps a bit too patiently. The first 20-odd minutes of the game had a few picks here and there, but nothing that truly mattered. It wasn't until 27 minutes into the game when the first true battle began. Gamed had a massive team fight around Dragon that gained them a foothold on the map. From there, they would group up together and move as a pack. Unfortunately, a crucial mistake takes place for Gamed. The jungler was looking for an engage, but the team was simply not on the same page, giving SK ample opportunity to win the fight. Now, the map belonged to SK, as they were the pack roaming around looking for danger. Gamed had to regroup and think of a plan together if they wanted to beat SK and still have a chance to win the series. It was do or die. And do they did. SK let their guard down for only a second, and Gamed found their play by taking out the enemy Ryze in mid lane. With one less member, SK didn't stand a chance. Gamed killed another SK member before they claimed the Baron objective for themselves. After that moment, the game would become a cat and mouse back and forth, a pick for each here or there with no clear victor from the trades. But it all had to end eventually. With a nice Gragas ultimate, Gamed were able to displace key members of SK in a fight in mid lane that would net them one more Baron, and finally, the win. With the series tied and having nearly played 2 hours in game, both teams were exhausted. Something had to give. And that something was SK Gaming. With several picks early and complete map control, Gamed were able to slowly burn the game away. By the time a big fight was in the makings, SK didn't stand a chance. It might have been a 45-minute game again, but it was games all the way. Gamed would pull off the impossible by defeating SK Gaming and claiming a spot at Worlds right alongside Against All Authority. With both teams winning, they move on to the upper bracket finals for a true David vs. Goliath story. The underdogs facing off against what many at the time considered the true favorites for Worlds itself. How would this epic series unfold? Against All Authorities won. How? Well, I'm glad you asked. Now, let's move down to the lower bracket. We're also just going to skip over some of these series because, let's be honest, they don't really matter that much. This series, though, this is our first major series we're going to talk about in the qualifiers. SK Gaming versus Fnatic. 2 of the 3 big orgs that we had coming into this tournament, and now only a single spot available for Worlds. The first game in our Worlds deciding match, Fnatic and SK each made several small plays against the other for the first 21 minutes. After dancing around the Dragon Pit for nearly a minute, SK attempted to start the fight, but Fnatic took the attack in strides, winning the fight and picking up the Dragon to boot. With a massive swing of gold and control, Fnatic would spend the next few minutes pushing out SK from the top side of the map in order to set up a play at Baron. With plenty of time, Fnatic easily got themselves wait, SK just walked up and stole the Baron. No fight, just a casual stroll and Baron for SK. That one play sums up this entire game. Nothing else matters in it. From this point, SK probably had massive grins on their faces in the next team fight that they crushed Fnatic in, and probably were laughing with one another in camaraderie as they exploded the Nexus for a Game 1 win. Both teams seemed to want Game 2 to be a bit of a redo of Game 1. The first 12 minutes of this game played out like a faster version of Game 1, even with Fnatic having a dragon fight they won. There was a key difference in this game from the previous though. Clearly Fnatic learned one critical lesson from that last game. Don't play around Baron. Every fight that Fnatic looked for, it was around dragon or the mid lane. You could even tell that SK were a bit thrown off by this tactic since they kept checking Baron to see if Fnatic was there. So when Fnatic steamrolled down mid lane at 31 minutes to push back SK like they had done in Game 1, SK were expecting Fnatic to start the Baron like before. The trap laid by Fnatic worked perfectly to get them the mid lane inhibitor, and the next time Fnatic went to the Baron, SK was nowhere in sight to attempt to steal. Fnatic tied up the series at 1-1. The series had now become a best of 1 to determine who goes to Worlds. With tensions high, the two teams were feeling the pressure. SK started off the action when their Aurelia got a solo kill in top lane. However, this would be the only play at all for the next 9 minutes. Not until Fnatic punished Aurelia for trying to recreate the same solo kill, but in the mid lane. SK, however, thought they could still turn around the play, but there is one important factor you must keep in mind when playing up against Fnatic. Never let Fnatic have someone playing Alistar. What started as a small loss that easily could have been overcome by SK turned into a massacre. All 5 players dead at just under 16 minutes into the game, when nothing had happened all game long until this point. Tensions had to be high over at SK. The players went from laughing about winning a Game 1 off a Baron steal to being at a deficit so early into a game that determines whether or not you go to Worlds. But if they could pull off that Game 1 win, they could mount a comeback here in Game 3. SK began to roam around the map as a goon squad, hunting for any stragglers of Fnatic. It was still early into the game, and normally players would still be farming the map in order to get more gold. With SK entering the jungle of Fnatic, they found a lone cow and pounced. Alistar fell fast in the fight, but the success of killing the mighty Moo came at the ultimate price. SK just didn't have the amount of gold, items, and presence on the map to have a full-fledged fight. Fnatic might not have been grouped up, but all of their members were within a short distance to immediately collapse on SK. Fnatic weren't about to let SK get their bearings back on the game either. Not to mention that Alistar was angry for revenge after that last play by SK. The cow was seeing red, and nothing was going to stop him. A flash and a 2-person knockup started off a fight to rout SK yet again. And maybe this route got Fnatic a bit too cocky, since Alistar would try to do the same play again, but with his team not in step with his actions. He would trade his life for one of SK, but this was well-needed time for SK. The game would come down to a Baron fight once more. Fnatic spotted a few of SK on the opposite side of the map from Baron thanks to some of the wards they had placed down earlier. Deciding to act fast, Fnatic started up the Baron. SK quickly realized their mistake and all 5 members booked it to Baron. Fnatic remained undeterred, but suddenly SK were right outside of the pit when the Baron died. SK were too late. Instead of fighting and losing for sure, SK pulled back in retreat. If SK still had a shot at pulling off a miracle, it would be inside of their own base. The defenses began to crumble to Fnatic's might, but SK saw an opening and an opportunity, now or never. But never was it to be. Fnatic were simply too far ahead and crushed the little hope left in SK. Fnatic marched their way down mid lane and would continue to march their way through the regional qualifiers, now with a secure spot for Worlds. Now that we have our 3 teams for Worlds, All there is left to decide is seeding. So, let's speed things up a bit. Fnatic would face off against Gamed in a rematch of a recent Go for LoL match. For those that don't know Go for LoL, they were just weekly tournaments that took place in the early days of League of Legends. Unlike in that matchup where Fnatic beat Game 2-0, Gamed were able to take this series 2-0 to move on into a rematch against All Authority. And the rematch result was the same result. AA beating Gamed pretty handedly 2-0. And thus, we conclude the European qualifiers and have our 3 teams to represent Europe at Worlds. 3rd seed, Fnatic. 2nd seed, Gamed. And 1st seed against All Authority. Before we move on, because it will be most apparent in this next set of qualifiers if you haven't noticed already, I've been avoiding using the name of players throughout the qualifiers, since a large portion of the players I just don't have information on. So instead of talking about some and avoiding others, we're just going to wait to talk about the player names when we have every team locked in for Worlds. Got it? Good. I also did get a haircut because it took me that long between the last recording and this recording, so now that we have that concluded and we have EU concluded as well, let's rewind the clock just a little bit and talk about North America. In fact, while we're at it, let's just continue to rewind the clock because I really should talk about how teams got into the North American qualifiers and to some extent the European qualifiers too. I didn't really talk about this before because, frankly, when it came to the Clash of Titans and the Singapore and Malaysian qualifiers, I just don't know how teams got in. In the early days of League of Legends, all tournaments were held by third parties and each varied in scope. Tournaments like Go for LoL were hosted by ESL weekly with events all over the globe. So I suppose you can infer that these also led into the regional qualifiers of all regions, but it's just more obvious for EU and NA. Quick fun fact, anyone could enter these Go for LoL events so long as you registered in time and had a full 5 stack. These weekly tournaments for Go for LoL would also have a monthly component to them. At the end of each month, the top 8 teams from showings in the weekly tournaments would compete for a slightly larger prize pool. And from there, we expand into much larger events that would host the best teams through invitation only. These would be your ESL Major Series for Europe and your National ESL Premier for North America. The reason why I brought this all now and not earlier is because of the National ESL Premier League. You can think of this as early access LCS. The first season of NESL began on March 31st of 2011 and went on until July 16th. Now, I know you're worried, but the round robin phase of the season ended before Season 1 Worlds began, with playoffs beginning after Worlds had already finished. Each matchup in the round robin were best of 3s, so teams really got to know each other's playstyles well. Anyways, getting back on topic. 7 of the 8 teams that would partake in the North American qualifiers would also play in this season of NESL. This gives us a lovely window into the past of exactly how these teams stack up against one another without having to just rely on the limited footage and articles that are out there. With that in mind, we can now turn our minds back to May 28th and focus on the North American qualifiers. Round 1 would immediately hit us with a banger. In the very first series, Counter Logic Gaming, rest in peace, would face off against the one team that wasn't a part of the NESL, Epic Gamer. Counter Logic Gaming were considered one of the top teams going into the qualifiers. In the NESL, they only dropped a single series after 9 weeks of play to the other favorites of the qualifiers, Team Solo Mid. As for Epic Gamer, despite being the only team that was not a part of the NESL, it's not like they were an unknown quantity at the time. The team formed in 2010 as Hawkshot GG and actually participated in the World Cyber Game Qualifiers. There's actually a nice video by Kudo out there discussing what the WCG is, and I'll link that down below. However, Epic lost out on playing in the main event of the WCG as they had lost to none other than CLG themselves. Twice. It was a double elimination bracket. The loss would break up Epic at the end of 2010, but just in time for NA qualifiers, the team would reform with 3 of the 5 players returning. Revenge was in the air. Game 1 was a pretty typical Season 1 game. The first 30 minutes of the game were slow with no team having control. It wouldn't be until 35 minutes into the game until something incredible happened. Both CLG and Epic were dancing around the Baron pit for some time. At first, it was CLG at the Baron, but then it was Epic. The two sides constantly testing the waters to see if they could engage in combat. Epic seemed to have successfully chased off CLG, but suddenly, one of the most important members of Epic was hit with an Ashe ultimate stun, giving CLG a window to begin the fight. But what happened next was a sight to behold. Epic's anti-player flashed over the wall and landed a 4-person stun, locking almost all of CLG down. From here, it was easy pickings for Epic. Even if they got a bit over ambitious, once the dust had settled, it was clearly an Epic 1 battle. Epic accelerated the game from here. One more pick onto Cho'Gath a few minutes later led it into a Baron take for Epic that might have had a close call of being stolen away by CLG's Janna. It was GG's for EG's first game of the qualifiers. What happens next in the series is tragic. There was no such thing as a pause built into the game back in the old day. If something happened to one of the players, like, say, their PC crashing, then the other 4 members would have to play the game 4v5. And if you can't get where I'm going with this one, well, Epic had a player disconnect. Despite multiple attempts, after 22 minutes into the game, Epic had to continue 4v5, gifting CLG a free win and tying the series at 1 apiece. Now, after a game where someone disconnects, you are either one of 2 types of player. You are either 1, the team that sees your opponent is tilted and look to tilt them further by going for a level 1 5-player invasion into your enemy's jungle, or A, the team that has a lot of pent-up anger from not getting to properly play a game and look to take all your rage out onto your adversary. Only one of these strategies will work per game, and results may vary, but Epic were ready to unleash hell. After punishing the invasion from CLG, Epic had a lovely start to this 3rd game. Karma was also kind to Epic in this game in another fashion, as their Swain got an early kill onto one of CLG's players when it was they that had a connection issue. Granted, the issue was resolved fast for CLG as well. That same Swain killed a different CLG member seconds later without needing such a benefit as a disconnecting player. Though, the damage had been done. Just in that small window, Epic gained so much. Experience leads for Epic players. Damage onto objectives like turrets that could easily be taken later. Gold picked up for Epic that wasn't gained by CLG. But this game means moving on in the winner's bracket or not. And CLG weren't about to give up so easily. Right from booting back into the game, CLG's Annie went into the bottom lane and got a double kill to bounce back in the game. However, the gods of lag might have been having a bit too much fun messing with the teams in this game too. Right after the play, Epic had another player disconnect, this time their Janna player. With this gift, CLG knew it would be all the easier for them to make plays on the map. Alistar got an easy kill in the top lane for CLG and followed up with a second kill there when Epic's Nunu tried to stop some of the bleeding. Thankfully for Epic, they still had an ace up their sleeve. After the plays earlier in the game, Swain had gained even more of an advantage since he raised the mid lane turret without any assistance. Granted, this is a major lead for Epic, but it doesn't make up for the fact that they still lacked one of their players. A miracle would be needed if they were to win this game. It started with one solo kill for Swain, again, and then a play in mid lane. Janna reconnected to the game as well. The pendulum was swinging towards Epic. However, pendulums tend to swing to and fro. It was time for the momentum to go towards CLG as they caught Swain overextended. Okay, he lived, but not Nunu. Okay, he lived too. Uh-oh. It was the play that could have been. The play to save CLG in this series. But not having killed anyone, it was Epic's momentum still unchecked. In spite of a different CLG player disconnecting right at the last moment, and the final recipe was Epic Gamer winning what some might argue as being a best of one to move on in the winner's bracket. And thus, the revenge arc completed. Epic knocked down Counter Logic Gaming into the lower brackets, and they themselves would move one step closer to getting a ticket. Hello again. Hi, it's me from the future. Well, not the future for you because this is all still a recording, but a future version of me from the past compared to the past version you were just watching. Anyways, sorry for the interrupt, but I made a bit of an oopsie when I originally wrote the script for this video. See, when researching old videos, some of the footage isn't always titled correctly. It made it hard to figure out what went in what chronological order, or even what games belong to the series I needed to talk about. And that brings us to this anomaly. When I came across a Game 4 and a Game 5 for a best of 3 series, I initially wrote it off as simply an error. But upon further investigation when getting footage for the video, I realized that these games weren't actually mislabeled. That's because there were actually 2 extra games in this best of 3 series. All of the connection issues led the players and ESL, the organization that was running the qualifiers for Season 1 Worlds, to make the decision to nullify games 2 and 3. Of course, this interruption to our scheduled program is a bit of a spoiler of what is to come, but I'll brush you up on the important bits of the extra 2 games. In Game 4, there was a competitive ruling put in place that said if a player disconnected before 3 minutes, the game would be reset. Unfortunately for Epic, they had a player disconnect at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Even though they reconnected, the game was decided from this play and CLG won the game from here. As for Game 5, both sides had to play the same champions that they did in Game 3. CLG set up a nice level 1 death brush in the bot lane to get an early kill, but almost all of the game was dictated by the plays Epic made. CLG had a few tries at gaining control, but could never wrestle the steering wheel away from Epic. In one attempt CLG made at taking the reins, Epic punished the play and got Baron before winning the game and the series. And thus, the revenge arc completed. Epic knocked down Counter Logic Gaming into the lower brackets, and they themselves would move one step closer to getting a ticket to Worlds. The rest of the series were similar to what we saw over in Europe. Rock Solid beat Oh My God Bears, Complexity beat Defy All Odds, and Team Solo Mid beat Disciples of the Great Whale Lord, all 2-0. With round 1 done, Epic Gamer would face off against Rock Solid and Team Solo Mid up against Complexity. Being the tournament favorites, it's no surprise that TSM easily beat Complexity, especially because the 2 teams had actually just faced off against each other in the NESL on May 26th, so 2 days prior to this event, with TSM easily winning that series and this series 2-0, nonchalantly getting TSM a guaranteed spot at Worlds. And if TSM were the favorite, with CLG being the runners-up to the title, then Rock Solid were definitely at the podium with the bronze medal. In fact, you can make an argument that on a good day, they would give TSM a good running for the gold medal, because this was the only team in the NESL to take a series off of TSM. But at the same time, Rock Solid were also the team that lost a series in the NESL to a team called HKEGG, a team that is in no way important to talk about again, say, in a series of videos about Season 3 Worlds. Now, let's dive into Rock Solid versus Epic Gamer for that guaranteed spot at Worlds. Game 1 started off terribly for Rock Solid, with their Sona dying pretty fast in the Poppy Taric lane that Epic drafted, absolutely destroying them. And things did not get better for Rock Solid either. Lee Sin failed to help out Katarina and only made things worse by dying to Epic's Malzahar too. At least the top lane is doing fine since Epic's Corki played a bit too aggressively. Oh wait, no, Malzahar showed up and finished the dirty work. Okay, checking back on the bottom lane, and yeah, things are still terrible for Rock Solid. But there was still hope for Rock Solid. Top lane was a thorn in the side of Epic. A series of good plays by Rock Solid and blunders by Epic got Rock Solid in the best position they've been in since loading into the game. Until one team fight. Rock Solid chased Epic, thinking Epic were on the back foot, but it was all just a bait. Poppy barely lived, and Epic used this acceleration of momentum to put themselves one game away from Worlds. Game 2 was defined by Teemo being picked by Epic. Rock Solid focused on him. Warwick focused on him. The casters focused on him. It was all based off how Teemo played in the game that made the game for Epic, especially after Teemo killed Warwick underneath the turret. I am sort of joking. Rock Solid realized that they did need to do something about Teemo, or they would find themselves in the lower bracket fighting for the single remaining spot against the likes of Counter Logic Gaming. As Epic set up a play to continue the Teemo pain train, Rock Solid answered just in time to turn around the play Amumu attempted, getting a lot of needed gold back. From there, Rock Solid would win the next dragon fight and have a lot going their way to win the game to tie the series. But Epic didn't defeat CLG due to just giving up games. Epic started to roam around the map as a goon squad, looking for the stragglers of Rock Solid not with the team. Slowly but surely, Epic were claiming more control of the map, turrets, and even dragons. Oh, I've realized I haven't really talked about what Old Dragon used to do. All it used to do was give gold to the team that killed it, but that was much needed for Epic at the moment. Desperation was beginning to set in for Rock Solid. If they wanted to keep this series alive and not be knocked down into the lower bracket, they had to make a heroic play. But one thing stood in their way. One champion acting like a brick wall for Rock Solid. Teemo. They had to think up a plan, and fast. After seeing 4 of the 5 players of Epic in the bottom lane, Rock Solid gambled on taking the Baron before Epic could contest their attempt. But Epic knew better. They still had the ultimate strategy. Teemo was still in the top lane, so he went to check on the Baron, spotting Rock Solid's play. Unfortunately, Teemo was too late. The Baron was taken by Rock Solid right as he got vision on the pit, and Rock Solid did not hesitate from there. They all jumped onto Teemo. With Baron and a dead Teemo, Rock Solid finally had all they needed to win the game shortly afterwards, bringing the series to a Worlds deciding Game 3. Rock Solid started off Game 3 fantastically. They got the first kill in mid lane with some help from the jungler, which leads later to another kill for the Malzahar solo at about 15 minutes into the game. But this game was a slow burn for both teams. With the pressure on, neither team wanted to make a catastrophic error that would lose them the series. Outside of the 2 earlier plays, it felt like whenever a play was made by one team, there was a different play made by the other to keep the game in equilibrium. The 2 teams became locked in a dance in this purgatory state for some time. Something had to give though. This tango could not go on forever. That's when the Baron play happened. Chaos. Rock Solid were in a great position, but then Akali was jumping on them, giving Epic the edge, but then Rock Solid pushed back and were winning, chasing into Epic's base, but then Vladimir respawned, and suddenly Epic were on the run. Absolute pandemonium! Until finally, calm. No one gained a single thing from the play. Except that Epic did gain some much needed time. They could reset the map, and now there was no clear favor for Rock Solid or Epic. A much better spot than before for Epic, seeing as they were slowly losing control. And then, Epic's Amumu got caught by the roaming goon squad that Rock Solid set up again. With a 4v5 advantage, Rock Solid went back to the Baron, but they weren't prepared for this. Mayhem, bedlam, havoc, commotion. Just throw all the synonyms out there and you still haven't quite described what just happened. Having just lost a crucial team fight at Baron while at an advantage, Rock Solid watched as the pendulum began to swing towards Epic. Momentum was gaining for Epic, but it wasn't over just yet. In most games that I've watched during qualifiers for Season 1 Worlds, I've noticed that when a team gets Baron, usually the game ends very shortly after. But with how little had actually happened in this game before the insanity began, Epic really hadn't toppled any turrets at this point. And so, Epic would take a lot from Rock Solid. But they would still need one more team fight if they were going to be confirmed for Worlds. And you would expect the team that had won such a massive team fight while down a teammate and not in the lead to eventually win the game. Right? No one told that to Rock Solid. Despite having lost an inhibitor in top lane, Rock Solid saw that Epic wanted to reset onto the map. With little options left, Rock Solid would go back to the Baron for a third time. And it ended exactly how you thought initially. Not only did Rock Solid not get Baron, but it was stolen from them, and they were crushed in the fight. Rock Solid wouldn't even let the Nexus be destroyed. They surrendered immediately. Thus, Epic Gamer would be guaranteed a spot at Season 1 Worlds. Rock Solid would still have another chance, but it would be in the lower bracket with only one spot remaining. And yes, I know that the TSM and Complexity series happened before this one, but it's all the same anyways. We're looking back in time, which means we can also fast forward through this next part. The lower bracket really doesn't have anything too exciting at this point. CLG beat Oh My God Bears, Defy beat Whale, CLG beat Complexity, and Rock Solid beat Defy. That leaves us just 2 teams and only one more spot for Worlds. Rock Solid or Counter Logic Gaming. Both teams knocked into the lower bracket by Epic Gamer. Both teams favored coming into qualifiers to make it to Worlds. Which team is going to make it after all? Let's watch, and of course, we can't actually watch it. No matter how much I scoured the internet, I just couldn't find this series anywhere. It is what it is. It was a 2-1 series, and since we still saw their name in the esports up until recently, it was a CLG victory. Rock Solid, this might be the last we see of this organization, but we will keep an eye on some of these players for future videos. Now that we have our 3 teams for Worlds, we still need to decide on seeding. Let's move back up to the upper bracket and technically back in time because this matchup actually happened before the CLG versus Rock Solid series, and that is Epic Gamer facing off against Team Solo Mid. And this is where I'm going to break my own rule I just made up earlier about talking about players in the qualifiers because we already know these teams are going to Worlds. They'll be getting our attention anyways. I feel it is important to bring up now because this will just get us more excited about seeing these players and these teams on the main stage. Despite Epic Gamer and Team Solo Mid not really playing up against one another, at least not in well-documented cases, they still had a deep history with one another. The founder of Team Solo Mid was a famous mid laner at the time called Reginald, or his real name, Andy Din. Andy and his brother Dan also created a website called solomid.net that helped create a community in the early days of League of Legends. Well, Reginald was also a highly competitive player and had originally made a team called All or Nothing, again with his brother Dan. But for reasons I'm not quite sure, the team broke up and Andy would actually join CLG for like a month before leaving them too. Reggie decided at the start of 2011 that he would try again at creating a team, and this time he would use the solomid.net brand to create the team and would birth Team Solo Mid. But Dan was not a part of this team. Instead, the team comprised of St. Vicious, Locodoco, Chaox, The Odd One, and Feedfest. By the time we get to the NA qualifiers, the team would bring in the Rain Man to replace St. Vicious and X Special to replace Locodoco. During these times, Dandon also had his own track record of forming and creating teams. While he did like to play with his brother from time to time, he enjoyed having separate teams from that. The first one was actually after All or Nothing fell apart. That team he created was Hawkshot GG. Remember that name from before? That's right. Epic Gamer was founded by Dandon. Now, the two brothers found themselves faced off against one another, with both having already qualified for Season 1 Worlds. So this might be weird, but I couldn't find Game 1 of the series. Epic came out on top in that one, so they're at a 1-0 lead. The second game was pretty much a pendulum game. Back and forth, Epic would be in the lead, then TSM, so on and so forth. TSM got themselves Baron at 27 minutes, but Epic were able to draw on the game so that the Baron wasn't all that useful. In fact, after TSM were pushing down mid lane to try to open up the base of Epic, Epic found a way to win a fight, all while not having all 5 players together. So, like against Rock Solid, they won a 4v5 fight. This one would also eventually win them the game to move on to the qualifier finals. With TSM knocked down to the lower bracket, they would find themselves up against CLG, both teams hungry for a rematch against Epic. But let's kind of speed things up. We're running out of time here. We're going to skip over the game by game. TSM won 2-1 over CLG, granting Reggie a chance at revenge against his brother. And damn, did TSM get their revenge. They clearly learned their lessons from the previous games against Epic, because neither of these two games in the finals were even close. Both games, TSM got early leads that they efficiently closed out, thus winning the North American qualifiers. There you have it. TSM gets North America's first seed, Epic the second, and CLG the third. That's just about every seed, so it's time to move on to Worlds, right? Oh, right. We still need to revisit Singapore and Malaysia and their 32-team bracket of chaos. Let's be real for a second. Most of these games don't really matter that much. Seeing as only a single team out of the 32 represents the entire region, that means unless they played up against the eventual winners, we really don't have that much to talk about on them. And even if the teams played up against the winners, we don't have scoreboards or statistics on the games, so those don't mean much to us either. So, I'll do you all a favor. I'm gonna put up the bracket here, and you can pause and analyze it all you want. I'll just talk about the finals. Deal? Well, deal, because you can't agree or disagree with me. Similar to how the Philippines were, we just don't have the footage of the games that were played throughout these qualifiers. However, I was able to find something even better. Something that didn't exist for any other region, at least none that I could find. And that is an interview with the winning team. So, here is Zan, the team that didn't lose a single game throughout the qualifiers.
That's our Season 1 Qualifiers champions, and this is Team Zen. This is Baby Zen, and the team is named after Baby Zen.
This guy on the right is he's our leader and team commander, Radeon. This one is Intrigue, our feeder of the team. I'm Darkness, the main carry, and this is Zeus, our reserve. Vec is our, I don't know, no use one. Action is our main AP. The night before this, we brainstormed really hard about various strategies to use and how to fight against the other finalist, Team 444. So winning this, we are actually really very happy about it. The prize money, unlock more skins and champions.
So congratulations once again, guys, and I hope you guys will train harder and do the Singapore and Malaysia server proud, all right? Thank you.
With Zan becoming the representative of Singapore and Malaysia, now we have all our teams locked in for Worlds. Next up, Jönköping, Sweden. Thank you for watching these first steps into Season 1 Worlds. The next video in this series will cover Day 1 of Worlds, as well as the introduction of all the players and teams we just watched qualify. I do wish that there was more footage I could have shown you of all the games that took place, as well as better info on every play that was part of the qualifiers, but thankfully, a lack of information and a lack of footage will only be a problem here, and going forward, we won't have that problem ever again. If you liked this video and watched all the way to the end, why not check out my Patreon? The more support I get on Patreon, the faster these videos can come out, and hopefully, the better I can make them. Until then, peace out.